Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Everyone awake and ready?
Awake and ready.
Great. Let us pray together. Oh, Heavenly Father.
Oh, Heavenly Father.
Divine Mother.
Divine Mother.
Beloved Jesus Christ.
Beloved Jesus Christ.
Blessed Master.
Blessed Master.
Dearest Mother.
Dearest Mother.
Saints and sages of all religions.
Saints and sages of all religions.
I bow to all of you.
I bow to all of you.
Free my life from all obstacles.
Free my life from all obstacles.
And give me physical, mental, and spiritual development.
And give me physical, mental, and spiritual development.
Make my mind thy altar.
Make my mind thy altar.
Make my love thy home.
Make my love thy home.
Be thou the only King.
Be thou the only King.
Reigning on the throne of my consciousness.
Reigning on the throne of my consciousness.
Peace, bliss, amen. Prayer always brings Mother so much to mind. I've written that, hearing her coming out into the room with a swish of their clothing and then leading us in that prayer, and just knowing that we were all going to be uplifted in God. And to feel that Mother and the Masters are here with us. It's a wonderful feeling when you start to really begin to know the presence of God and the Masters. In one sense, they are one and the same thing. But in another sense, God manifests himself as individuality. And it's his great joy to do so. He loves his play. When we're not enchanted with this play, it's because we feel our separation from him. And that we can go through anything and everything if his presence is with us. So that is our primary objective, is to establish our union with that divine consciousness by whatever name you may call him. It's a universal thing, you know. It doesn't make any difference whether that presence is called by Allah or Abba or by any other name around this world. Played these songs of Krishna, and for millions, Krishna represents God to them, an incarnation. And there's much fighting that goes on around, is God with form, is God without form? Truth is, God is both. It is beyond all creation, and it is also immanent within this creation. It's both. If God created everything that is, what else did he create with but the substance of his own essence? And therefore, God is permeating everything that we see. We simply, too often, do not have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, as Jesus spoke of. If we could really see, we would know that the air is permeated with that divine presence. We would know that every body cell also has that presence, that it is in interstellar space. It is throughout this planet and all planets and all suns and all stellar systems. It is a universal presence. And when we tune into it, we can then see it, we can then hear it. We have the ears, we have the eyes. But until then, it is as if it does not exist at all, or only very sporadically. So this is our purpose, this is our intent. And we are given some of the greatest tools this world has ever known. There's the wonderful story of a disciple of Lari Mahasaya, and he's asking for more initiations and to do more kriyas and so forth, thinking that that's the one essential, and it's true. It's a very, very powerful tool, and it's one that we should employ with everything that we have. But then came in the mailman. Now, to add spice to the stories, so to speak, in India, we would have to understand that a mailman would be socially in a very low caste system. But Lari Mahasaya didn't distinguish between castes. He treated everyone equally alike. So he is a forerunner of things to come. And you know that he would get grief from other Brahmins. He was in a Brahmin class himself. Or perhaps rubbing elbows and taking students who were not of the same caste. This is frowned upon, especially at that time. But it didn't make any difference to him because he saw God equally in everyone and everything. And so in come the mailman who had taken initiation from Lari Mahasaya. And the master asked him, as this other man had been asking for increasing his kriyas. And he said to the mailman, do you want more kriyas? And the mailman humbly bowed before Lari Mahasaya and said, no, sir. He says, I'm just trying to manage with what I'm getting already. I'm just so floating in the sea of bliss. I can barely deliver my letters. And the other man bowed his head in shame, and he said, I can see that I'm a poor workman who's blaming my tools. So we've given all the tools that are required. And so to really feel that we're on the path, as mothers would say, all those who are here are on the final mile, if they would but employ what they have been given. There's a wonderful little posting every day that comes from Ananda, the website, and each day it says where Master was and what he was doing back in over the years. And this is 1924, October 14th. Yogananda was in Seattle, Washington after a cross-country trip that included lectures in Denver that drew 2,500 people and a lecture in Seattle that drew 2,000 people. So 1924, it's the year before Mother met him. He came back the next year and gave lecture series then as well. And that is when Mother met Master. So the 1924 was the first year that he was here. And I think it must have been when the man who eventually brought Mother to the talk had seen Master and had been so impressed with him. You can sign up for that through the Ananda website, where each day they will deliver. And if there's nothing, which is rare, on that day that Master was recorded doing something, he was so active, always traveling, always lecturing, doing so many things. He is really a tremendous force for God. And on those rare days when they don't have anything recorded from him, then they'll put in one of his meditations for the days. Reading from Mother, The Shape of Your Heart, from that talk, The Shape of Your Heart, given in 1982. We're always seeking wisdom in the human sense, but do we really go to work and put the same amount of effort into seeking the wisdom of God, which is within us? Just think, we have the power to sit in a chair in one place and travel the whole universe, not only in this world as we would in an airplane or a boat or a train or by horse and buggy, but the whole universe, the whole galaxy. I have traveled up amongst the stars. I know I was up there when I was going through some of these experiences, floating in space, and I saw the planets revolving around me. I saw the stars, millions of them, all over, and it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And then God took me back into my body, and he showed me that I had the same universe right within myself, that I had these revolving currents within myself, the positive and the negative. It keeps everything in place. And he showed me my spine, and he likened it unto a chain. And he showed me how the life current was going in and out of this chain, and how it kept me alive. He showed me that I too had the sun and the moon within me, and that I had the sun in the center of my forehead, and I had the moon in the solar plexus, which is the second brain. All that I had all of the organs, that I had all the tributaries, the rivers in my circulatory system. I have everything in here. I had the stars in my spinal center. I had the church, the 7 churches within me, and I am the temple of the living God. I'm an exact replica of everything there is in a universal sense, and so are you. Isn't that wonderful? And I had that experience. Strange to say in a way, because it's difficult to describe. But God took my center of attention, and it was as if I was looking right into the interior of my spine. Now we call it the spine, and it is the location where it is physically inside of us, but the spine exists also in the subtle bodies. And so in such visions as this, you're not looking into the literal physical spine, but in the astral and the causal, as well as the pure spiritual. They're all contained right there in the spine. That's what's marvelous about this path. We don't even have to travel any place at all. We can just sit in our meditation chair, as Mother talked about, and we can put our attention upon the Christ center, this point between the eyebrows. And we're taken on the most tremendous adventure when that occurs. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's unknown to most of the world, so it doesn't make the news headlines. It doesn't make it prominently into the literature even. That we have this entirety within us. And I looked within the spine. God took me into that experience. And when I saw that, I saw the entire universe within the spine. And it was like a small bubble of a universe within the spine. And then there's so much beyond that. As Master talked about, this is an island universe within many, many universes all around it. And all of that, as Sri Yukteswar describes to us, is like a small solid basket under a huge luminous balloon, which are the astral realms. So much brighter, so much bigger, so much diverse even than what this universe that we live in. There are so many dead planets, and everything is living in one sense. But it doesn't have life as we know it in terms of nature, the trees and the rivers and so on. But in the astral universes, everything is teeming with life. And it's beautiful. The colors are beyond anything that we have here. Sometimes I see flowers in bloom. And you see really stunning colors, and I think, oh, that's beginning to tilt towards the astral. They're just so bright and luminous. But it's like looking at a computer screen and seeing a picture that is made up of light. And then you see something that is on a piece of paper, and it looks dull in comparison. And that is the way that the astral realms are just so much more than this physical realm. And you can travel by thought. You can think of yourself as moving from one place to another, and you just simply do. You can travel by vehicle. If you're more advanced, you can just simply place yourself wherever it is that you're thinking about. And there, words are not necessary because you have a thought transference that goes directly from person to person and reduces so much of the need for conversation. It removes all the ideas of misunderstanding because you get directly what the other person's thoughts are. And for some people, they get glimpses of this and it feels like heaven to them and they think this must be heaven. And in a sense it is, because in those realms there is peace, there is joy. If there are people who are determined to be out of harmony with truth and light, there is a realm for them, a dark region, and you might call that hell. And you can see where people get these versions of what is heaven and what is hell. But heaven actually contains quite a bit more than that. Heaven goes beyond the astral realms. It's beautiful and it's refined, and as uplifting as they are, they're still limiting. And you can get entranced with how things look there. And as a result of that, you can limit yourself and your perception of God. But for those who go deeper, Sri Yukteswar said that he was existing on a planet that's actually a type of heaven for the astral realms. It's in the astral realm, but it's a higher, more refined realm. And only those souls who had achieved Nirvikalpa Samadhi in this lifetime, very highly developed, but not all the way there, could come to the planet that he is on. And they would learn to go deeper. They would learn to resolve the limitations that they were up against until they could merge into the causal. And the causal is above and beyond all the astral. And it's beautiful. And everything is a thought representation. It takes on a greater plasticity and is able to go according to your thought, not just the images. And so it too has a tremendous beauty. And the light there is really fantastic. And so you enter into this causal realm. But even then, there is a thin layer. You see, it perfectly duplicates but is inside all of us. Everything that Mother described here, in terms of the outer cosmos being on the inner. The sun that is at the ajna, at the third eye point, is able to perceive all the way past the causal and into pure spirit. So we can go beyond the astral realm. We can go beyond the causal realm. Everything is available to us right here. We don't have to wait to die to enter into the astral, work through that karma, and then rise up and go into the causal, work through that karma, and go into the absolute. We can do it right in our own meditation asana. So it's here that we can go the whole way. Isn't that a tremendous thing? It removes all the limitations. There are so many people who have been told, and they believe, that you have to die in order to go to heaven. And yet, Jesus himself said, the kingdom of heaven is right within you. It's also interesting. I think we can learn a lot by not just going by what we've been told, many of us since we've been young, what these scriptures mean. But there is the man who approaches Jesus. And there's two versions to the story. One, Jesus tells the truth of this, and another, this individual does. And the individual states what the two greatest laws are of all the spiritual kingdom: to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, and strength and soul. And the second, like it, to love thy neighbor as thyself. And when Jesus heard this man, it's that the scripture that he chose. And I'm sure he must have said it with complete and utter devotion and a great deal of understanding. Because Jesus said a very interesting thing then. You are not far from the kingdom of heaven. And we have to ask ourselves then, well, does that mean that the man's going to die soon? And that's not what he means at all, of course. He's identifying your state of mind, your consciousness, how you say that, and with what utter devotion and realization. It tells me that you are right on the cusp of entering into that kingdom of heaven. Now, he had not accepted Jesus Christ as his only Lord and Savior. So you see how many lessons we can draw from this one simple story. One is the kingdom of heaven is right within you. The second is that through your own understanding, your own realization. I like the word realization better than understanding. Understanding denotes something of the mind. And we can accept something. We can think that something is true. And we really believe it. We really think that is the truth. We hear what Mother speaks. That is the truth. And that's how I felt when I met her. Not all in the beginning, because I had a long ways to go. Other people hear the first time and they just know it from the start. Everything that she speaks is the truth. I wasn't that highly developed. And so it took me a while. I had a doubting mind. And I wanted to prove it. But it was through my own experiences that it did get proved, you see. That I started to go through these experiences. I didn't even think that I would be. I was taken through those experiences. I had the Kundalini erupt inside of me, and it was so powerful. It wasn't anything that I could just say, oh, that was an idea. That was like a dream that I had, or a vision that I had in a very tangential kind of sense. It was powerful, and it was right within my own body, and it was painful as well. I almost think that I was such a stubborn-minded person that God had to do it in such a dramatic kind of way to convince me. It convinced me down on the physical level, because it involved this physical being as well as the astral, as well as the causal and the spiritual. So you have to watch out. Babaji himself said that the individual determines his path. And for somebody who has a highly critical mind and examining every single thing, that's what they have to face on the way up. And if somebody has a more devotional nature and can just simply accept God as he is, then that's the path that they draw to themselves. So if we're facing a tough path, then we can make an inference in there. Maybe we're a little, as God used to say about the Jews, that they're stiff-necked people. Maybe we're a bit stiff-necked ourselves, and we need a little loosening up. We need a little chiropractic adjustment. And so God puts us through some tough love. Anyway, going through these experiences began to really convince me down to the core of my being, and every single thing that Mother taught bore fruit inside of me. Now, I didn't experience everything she experienced. She talked about the seed, the Christ seed, that's formed in the brain. And then it follows a route, a circuit. It goes down the nervous system, the ganglionic nervous system, and goes, and as Mother talks about, is deposited into a conical-like cave just behind the stomach. And Bethlehem means house of bread. So this is where it's deposited. And then Herod rises up in all of his passions and seeks to expel that seed. And so if you're minding your own business and going about just trying to meditate on God, and suddenly these passions just hit you like a freight train, you can know that this is something that is happening inside of you. And then this seed travels down to the base of your spine. And the spine, working up through the spine, is Galilee, which means the circuit. And so up you go towards the Sea of Galilee, and you gather your disciples as you go, and that's the different chakras as you go. And it goes all the way up to the fifth center. That's at the throat center. And for years, I felt like I had a stone in my throat. It was just stuck in there, and it was uncomfortable. And I did everything I knew what to do to work my way through it. And that was the seed that was in my throat. Mother, in her own experiences, worked it up into her mouth, and she actually took out the seed. And she said it was like a styrofoam capsule. And she had it somehow inside of herself to know to break it open. And she did so, and she said there was one perfect drop of blood in it. And that was the blood and the body of the Christ. It's what many people do on a monthly or a weekly or a daily basis. They take the body and the blood of the Christ. But Mother had this in reality, not just in an outer ritual. And so it didn't come up into my mouth in the same way, and it worked itself back into the body, and it can do this. That's the most common thing. With Mother, that was an unusual thing. And then you continue working your way up. You work through that throat chakra. Now, the throat chakra is discernment of truth. And you start to really get a more refined sense. Now, down in your solar plexus, your second brain, as Mother called it, that is a place of intuition. That's John the Baptist. And you'll get things. You hear policemen talk about having a gut sense about something. They feel something down there. Either it fits, or it's uncomfortable, or something that bothers them. And that's the place of intuition. That's the John the Baptist. And what the John the Baptist knows, as you develop yourself spiritually, is that the Christ is coming. This Christ consciousness, you feel it, you know it, down here. And you start to act on that information. John the Baptist puts himself through tapasya, what's called tapasya in India. He's very severe with himself. He lives out in the desert. He doesn't eat much. He doesn't drink much. And he's like the sadhus are in India. And they live like that as well. But when the Christ comes, he comes and he gathers his disciples, and he doesn't abide by that same kind of austerity. And what does that mean? It means that when we're in the John the Baptist mode, we're preparing. We're doing everything that we can to make ourselves a fit instrument. Now, we don't have it yet. We don't feel it yet. We're not in that experience of the Christ consciousness, but we're striving for it. And we're striving for it with everything that we have inside of us. And then the Christ comes, and he wants baptism of John the Baptist. And this is, he passes through the solar plexus, but then you rise up above it as he's gathering his disciples with him. And as he does so, you get in touch with that Christ consciousness. Now in the scriptures, Jesus is teaching during that time. And beautiful, beautiful teachings, really, beyond anything that they had in their own scriptures. And they have some wonderful, wonderful scriptures. But he taught in a new way. He taught in a personal way. That it's not just an impersonal God. That it's a loving God. And like a father, somebody you can know on an intimate basis. And he demonstrates that in his own self. He's able to speak as if he's speaking from the Father himself. He's able to act in this way. Everything in his life is attuned to that. I and my Father are one, and he feels that. He experiences it, and it flows through him, and the disciples get it. They experience it, but it doesn't mean they're not without doubts. Each chakra has a positive and a negative. Each disciple, you might say, represents these different energy centers within the spine. And so you work your way up, but now Christ consciousness is with you. It's speaking to you, it's acting through you, it's loving through you, it's opening the doors for you. You don't have to live so much in the austerity as you did before. Now, this isn't an excuse for license of behavior. We have to be very, very careful, more careful, really. Because before, you were trying to govern your behavior. Now, Christ consciousness is governing your behavior. It's determining what you should do and what you should not do. And your part is to attune yourself to it. But you're not completely there yet. You have these oppositional forces. And so you have these other things that rise up and try to dissuade you, try to take you into different directions. And so you work to be in conformity with this highest Christ vibration. Now, Christ, in this sense, is universal. It's the same as Krishna in India. It's the same as Buddha in India. It's the same as Lao Tzu in China. It's the same divine consciousness that inspired and uplifted millions and millions of people in other religions. And this fighting between religions is something that will one day be viewed as so barbaric. Why didn't they understand? They're all approaching the same Father God. They're all approaching nirvana by whatever name that you wish to call it. Some are more personal, some are more impersonal. The Buddha had a tremendous mind, such clarity of thought. And his was of a more impersonal nature. Now I have the notion that he grew up, of course, he grew up in a Hindu society. And perhaps he saw that the priests there did not live up or understand what it was that they were doing in terms of rituals. And he didn't want any kind of form to become between the individual and their goal of achieving nirvana. So he didn't talk about a person, and they asked him, is there a God? And he says, why are you asking that question now? Why don't you get realization? And with realization, you'll understand. It's really very difficult to talk about. And he didn't want people getting focused on particular images. Now, it seems as a strange paradox, and I don't think he'd be very happy about it. But we all have images of Buddha in the garden, in our houses, everywhere. He's accepted everywhere. And there's probably been no more images made in this whole world than there have been of Buddhas. And so it's a strange paradox. The very thing that he taught against and didn't want was the very thing that is produced. And then you see Southeast Asia and Tibet and other places, and they have so many images of gods and goddesses, none of which he would approve of at all. But you know, you don't always get your way, especially in this world. And I think you really have to be surrendered. If you're a Jesus Christ, you're a Buddha, and you know that what you teach is the absolute truth, the purest, highest truth. You also know that whatever it is that you teach will be twisted, it will be changed. It will conform either because people just simply don't have the intelligence to understand it properly, or because they really want to take it off in other directions out of their own greed and ego. And so you know that it's going to be misused along the way. So it takes a real point of surrender to put yourself out there like that, and to allow your teachings to go. You toss the seeds to the wind, and the wind will blow it all around this world. You know, it's a very interesting thing. I heard one time that the air that we breathe in and breathe out then circulates all over this world, and that we have breathed some of the same air, some of the same atoms that Jesus himself breathed, because it's gone out all over this world and it's spread out. That means Buddha and Krishna. Isn't that a wonderful thought? That we breathed in some of the same molecules or air that they did. So we have it all inside of us. And this is where all the action goes. So God started to put me through these experiences, and he erupted this Kundalini inside of me. Now, the Kundalini is essential for realization, and it happens differently. For some people, it's in a more subtle, refined kind of way. For others, it's much more powerful and distinct. But the hallmarks is that we feel that life energy, that consciousness, that purity and that power of divinity. It's unmistakable. It's so totally different than what we normally are used to. So it's no trouble identifying it, even if it comes in a less radical way than it did for Mother, for instance. And Mother assured us, none of us would have to go through the experiences she went through in the way that she went through them, because she had come with a special mission. And so we feel that uplifting, purifying power coming up through the spine. It lifts us into the higher centers of the brain. Now, what does this mean? You can feel and you can experience these things right now as I think of the medulla that's at the base of the skull. I can feel this tremendous vibratory power coming in. I say vibratory because it comes across as a kind of vibration. You think of what a tuning fork must experience if you were the consciousness of a tuning fork and you would hit it, and you can see it vibrating and you can hear the sound that comes from it. And it can be powerful depending on the size and the purity of the tuning fork itself. And you feel that power, you feel that vibration, that tingling sensation, you might say, but it's more than that. And it's consciousness itself. So as you tune into it, you can feel it coming in at the base of the skull. And then I feel it coming into the brain. And it electrifies the brain. It brings that sensation all the way through so that every cell of the brain is lit up with that consciousness, with that Om or that Amen. And then you go to the ajna, and you feel and experience the ajna. There you feel perhaps in the beginning like a pressure pushing against the ajna. You feel a tingling sensation there. And then it begins to open up and you see the light of God that's there. And you feel expansiveness of consciousness. And it's wonderful and it's beautiful. This is your Christ consciousness happening right within you. This is Christ walking on the shores of Galilee. He's gathered his disciples with him. He's instructing you. He's changing you. Because as you go through these experiences, you are changed. You are purified. And there's nothing more than what you want to be with that all the time. All the time. And it comes and it's so uplifting and it's so beautiful. And then it goes away. And it's so devastating. And all you want is to have that with you always. And that's an important step. Sometimes we think we've slipped and we fell, and it could be that we lost our attention on God for a while, and so we did slip. But it can also be we're just in these alternating currents, as Mother talked about this chain going up her spine. And the alternating currents as it does so. And so we're in the alteration of it. We're taken in a different direction. We're taken away from that Christ consciousness. But through the yearning that develops in the heart, it helps to purify us once again. So we don't need to be afraid of that purification. We don't need to be afraid of that yearning. In fact, we embrace it. And when you think, this is God, this is Christ who's come to me in the form of this yearning, there are so many millions who don't have any desire at all for God. They're just simply going about living their lives, and they may be good people, very well are. They just don't have it in them. I don't hold it against anyone for not seeking out the spiritual path, that they've not had that experience. To them, it's just simply an idea. And it might be a good idea. It might be a nice idea. They might go to church. But they don't really have it yet. They haven't awakened to it. So unless and until God gives them that experience, then once that experience comes, then we're faced with a choice. Do we then seek to have that experience more often, to make it our very own? Or do we just simply go about our lives once again? So many people are like the proverbial teenager, you know. He wakes up and because his body is growing, and he just rolls over and he goes back to sleep for longer. And then maybe he wakes up again for a little bit, then he rolls over and he goes back to sleep again. And we're like that spiritually. Well, that's a wonderful experience. I needed that. I was in a crisis. Now, never mind God. I've got the controls. You can just go away and I'll run my own life. Thank you very much. And so we have that waking up, going to sleep, waking up. But there comes a time in our evolution when we really understand this world just goes round and round and round. As many experiences that I've had, I can go to so many football games, or I can go to work so often. I can have so many different professions. I can have so many marriages, so many children down through the lifetimes. And eventually we get a sense of this sameness. It no longer has an aliveness for us in the same way. And then we begin to awaken. There's got to be something more to life than just this, what then may feel like drudgery. There's got to be something more. And that is God waking up inside of you. That is God beginning to speak to you. And by the time you get to that yearning, oh, I want this experience more than anything else in life, you really come someplace spiritually. Now, you may feel like you're the lowest one on the totem pole because you're feeling the lack of God in that moment. You can also see it as grace, who is awakening itself in you. And this happened to me many, many times. It happens repeatedly, as often as it's needed, in order to purify us, in order to get us to that point where all we want is that realization. And when that comes, then we stand very close. And then we listen to God. We listen to Christ within us. And we go the whole way. What does that mean? It means we surrender ourselves unto that intelligence. I had a pinnacle point at one time that I've spoken about before, but it stands out in my mind. As I was walking up a hill, and all of a sudden it's as if a syringe, a giant syringe above me, just withdrew all the life force in me. And I realized I had nothing of my own. Not a thing. I couldn't move a muscle. Nothing was of my own. And I just told God, I said, you can take me right here. If you will it, I'm all right with that. But if I'm going to move, if I'm going to be able to get back to my home, then you're going to have to do it. You have to give me this life energy. And how many of us just go about the day, we're working, we're doing, and we just think, this is me, I'm living my life, and I'm completely separate. And it's impossible, I tell you. It's impossible to have a life separate from God. You could not lift a finger. You could not even have any pain in your body if it were not God for constantly and actively moving through you. And so even the negative experiences, what we think of as negative experience, that too comes as a result of the life that is inside of us, and all life comes from God. So this is where we come to. We come to that realization that Jesus said, of myself I am nothing. It is my Father who doeth the works. And he knew it. He wasn't just speaking platitudes. He was speaking from his own state of realization, because he had come to that point where he knew that that was the truth. And so do we, and so do we. And then your mind, your intelligence, and you think, well, I have my own thoughts. And most of us, we like to guard the privacy of our own thoughts. And yet, we would not have one thought, no power of thought at all, if it did not come from God, who is the supreme intelligence of everything that is, beyond everything that is. And we could not have one thought if it were not for the power of God streaming into our brains, into our minds, into our beings, and allowing us to have that. Now, what happens when you feel that all of your life energy and all of your thinking and all of your emotions, everything that you have is streaming to you from God? Then you align yourself with God, because you recognize that there is a purity of spirit that is flowing to you. You know, prosperity means so much more than just that we are able to pay the rent, or we're able to buy a certain thing that we'd like to get. That's certainly a level of prosperity in this world. But prosperity comes on every level. It comes physically, health, intelligence, emotions. We can access prosperity on every single level. Now, I love to think of God as an immense river, immense body of water that is ready to pour through me, that my body stands a bit like a dam, you might say, with this immense body of consciousness and power and intelligence of God, all behind me. And God chooses what spillways to open up and how it expresses itself through me. Now, I spend many days, it would seem odd to many people, but I spend many days just simply enraptured with God. And it's what he does with me. And I struggle with it sometimes. I have a tussle with God. I argue with him. I say, listen, God, everything here has to devolve on Carla and other people to do all these things. I don't like it. I want to pull my own weight. Do you think he listens to me? Not much. He does what he wants to do. And I'm happy, really, even when I argue with him. I'm happy to do whatever it is he wants me to do. But I still think he should have me do a little bit more in this world. And I enjoy it when I do, when I can get out and do things. I really enjoy it. But most of all, I want him. I want his bliss. I want his upliftment. Now, he's doing some work through this form. And sometimes it really tests the form in order to do the work. And when I say test, not in the old sense, it's just a great strain because of the power. You think of all the power that God is, and that if he's putting it through your form, that it can really stress this form, and that's all right too. It's all right too. If he completely uses this form up in service to him, I couldn't be happier. So you live this way. And you feel that everything that streams through you, your ability to move, to breathe, to think, everything that you are, it all comes from Him. Now you can do this as a spiritual practice before you have the actual experience, but you just practice it. You think on that, and you think on that connection from behind you, and you feel that flow. And some people want gads and gads and gads of money and power and fame and prestige and all the rest of it. And other people don't want any of that, and they want to live very simply and maybe even poorly. And we have to let go of all those ideas, because those are our ideas. And you may want us to live very poorly and very simply, and God makes you a gazillionaire. And even if you give it all away, it comes back to you again. Because He's using you in the particular way that He chooses to use you. And you surrender to that. When Mother asked me to start giving talks, there's people who like to be up in the front of the room. I wasn't one of them. I'd rather be at the back of the room, listening. Now, you know the wonderful secret about it is, I'm still in the back of the room listening. Because as God's intelligence, I can feel it. It flows through me. I don't know what I'm going to say next. And I'm sitting and I'm listening, even as I'm apparently speaking. And I know many, many of you have had this experience. You're talking to somebody about God, and the words just flow from you. The intelligence just flows through you. And then other times you try to talk to somebody, you think, oh, this is a good time. And you try to do it. You don't even make any sense to yourself, much less anybody else. And you get confused in your own thoughts, and you go, what in the world's going on here? And it's not the right moment. That was you thinking that it should be. And then you listen, and you go, okay, God, this is obviously not going very well. I think I'll let this go. So you see what a wonderful life it is. And as Mother said, when you're in business with God, you're in business with all of life. So whatever your profession is, whatever direction God takes you in, that is God too, if you make it so. And you know, one of the fail-safes around reaching back and connecting with God and feeling that everything flows from Him, if you get it wrong, if you're doing something that's outside of that divine will, and you're doing that practice, it'll feel wrong to you. You'll lose your energy around it. Those thoughts will stop. And it'll change your thinking, or at least you'll stand back and go, this isn't correct. I feel it. I know it. And then you can do whatever it takes to get on track, to get back to God. So let us really go to work on ourselves, as Mother would say. We live in this world. We have to render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. He demands a certain amount. But you know, there's an interesting conversation that happened with Ramakrishna, and there was an organization called Brahma Samaj, and they were spiritual in nature, but they were also trying to change the social patterns, and they were challenging the caste system and that women had equal rights and so on. So they asked Ramakrishna about this, and he says, that's all right. All of that is all right. But that you get involved heavily in that in the beginning. But really, going all the way to God is so much more than that. And I started thinking about that. And when you go all the way to God, there's so many people who make so much noise about this and that, whether it's politics or social situations or the rest of it. And maybe you're doing good and maybe you're not. You don't really know all the time. You have your opinions, you have your thoughts. And then you turn your mind to God. And then His thoughts flow through you. His will flows through you. And then you know what you do or what you don't do is all in alignment and agreement with Him. And it will be, by definition, for the highest good of all. So even if you want the maximum good, on a societal basis. It's better to go and get your full God realization first, and then let him live his life through you. There's a wonderful story about the blacksmith who's hammering and hammering and hammering away at a piece of iron. And maybe he's the first blacksmith ever, and then he decides to heat up the iron because the iron's not doing what he wants it to do. It's not bending to shape. And he gets it exactly at the right temperature and exactly at the right condition. And then he hammers away a few times and it starts to bend and it does exactly what it is that he wants it to do. That's what a spiritual master does. May not look like they're doing much at all. And then they do one thing, a few things, and it changes the world. And somebody else is over there hammering and hammering, and maybe yammering and yammering away. And it does nothing. It changes nothing. So if we really want the highest good for this world, then we seek God first. We make him our Lord and our Master. And then when he speaks, the world listens. And this is a tremendous thing. You think of Sri Yukteswar, he just had a quiet movement, you might say. He had some young boys who were disciples. He had other people who would come to him. But it wasn't massive, it wasn't huge. But he had a Yogananda. And Yogananda was like this immense freight train that was just bound to make a difference in this world. But there could not have been a Yogananda without a Sri Yukteswar, without a Lahiri Mahashaya, without a Babaji who retains mostly up in the mountains and doesn't interact much at all with the world. But you see how he worked as well. And now we all know the Babaji. We all know Lahiri Mahashaya. We all know about Sri Yukteswarji. Because we had Master, because we had Mother. So don't think about, well, am I having a difference in this world or not a difference? If God chooses to work through you, he will make it all happen. He will draw exactly the right circumstances to you. And it may just take one hammer. You may influence one person. You may not even know the person that you influenced. But they're paying attention. They see it. They feel it. When I was with Swami Satchidananda, I was at Kathy Smith and others. They sent their love to Swamiji. Said, you all express your love so easily. Says, I don't feel it. Said, Swamiji, everybody who walks into this room feels the great love that comes from you. How is it that you don't feel it? And in his simplicity, he said, I don't know. Now, in years later, he spoke much more from that place of love. And I think he was experiencing it then. I saw him change down through the years. He became such a remarkable, he was in the beginning a remarkable spiritual being. But in the beginning, he would say, Papa said this, Mataji said this. Later on, he spoke more directly from himself. And he experienced that great love. So you see, even great souls go through experiences and they go through refinements. Mother found very, very few who were existing on the level that she was, that Sahaja Samadhi. Very few. But all had the capacity to rise up to it. And I think Swamiji, by the end, had that. He was just pure love. He was pure God. This year we celebrate his 100th anniversary. They're doing it at the ashram all year long. Swami Chandra Anandaji, who I think so highly of, had made a special point. She very much wanted me to come. This next November, so a year from this November 2019, we're going to go feel the pull of God all right. Thought about it many times, and no, it's never the right time. But it feels like this is going to be the right time to go. So I said to Swami Vijjananda, there may very well be others who are signing up to come. So he said, all right, everybody can come. They're there to serve. They do such beautiful service that all those people give constantly, every day. Every day is a Sunday there. So to really set our minds, just tune yourself in as if it's God who's thinking through you, feeling through you, acting through you, speaking through you, doing every God blessed thing through you. And if you don't start out that way consciously, you'll end up that way because God will make it so. Let's pray together. Oh, Heavenly Father.
Oh, Heavenly Father.
Divine Mother.
Divine Mother.
I feel the wonder and the beauty.
I feel the wonder and the beauty
of thy glorious presence.
Of thy glorious presence.
In every part of my being.
In every part of my being.
My heart is bursting with my love for thee.
My heart is bursting with my love for thee.
Kneel in adoration at thy feet.
I kneel in adoration at thy feet.
And surrender myself to thee.
And surrender myself to thee.
I feel the power of thy perfection.
I feel the power of thy perfection.
Surging in every cell of my body.
Surging in every cell of my body.
My mind and my intelligence.
My mind and my intelligence.
Are radiant with thy healing light.
Are radiant with thy healing light.
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss.
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss.
Of my communion with thee.
Of my communion with thee.
I and my Father are one.
I and my Father are one.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Peace, peaceless, Amen. Amen. It's about great light. Lovely for all of us to be here together. Our rotary plans are to head for the desert, but continue with Skype and YouTube. And also, probably best way to get a hold of me usually is either texting or through emails. I always give the caveat that if God's not operating in that way, then you may not hear from me directly. I'll straight back to you. And feel this love and feel this presence of God. Take it with you. And to give it freely, all of this world. Wonderful thing to give to.